Hi, everyone. I am Sarah Feldman from the Consortium for Service Innovation, and so glad to have you with us today. We have a few featured guests that are going to be joining this conversation, David Kay and Thomas and Kelly. Would you want to introduce yourself so folks can get to know who they're going to be hearing from in the next hour?
Absolutely. I'm David Kay, principal of DBK and Associates, and we have been helping organizations not only adopt but continue to improve their KCS implementations for the last 22 years. So it's a delight to be here with all of you.
Hey guys, I'm Thomas Furman. I'm located in Utah. Um, I work with Catalink, a company that's headquartered in New Zealand. Um, and we do basically all of the normal KCS trainings. We also do a very sophisticated ONA, organizational network analysis. We're lucky enough to have somebody who's a data whiz, have some great coaching programs. And um, Anyway, I've been involved with KCS since 1999 and have worked with literally dozens of companies in about 20 different countries, and very, very passionate about KCS and what it can do for organizations. Anyway, welcome and nice to see you all.
Good morning. I'm Kelly Murray. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer for the Consortium for Service Innovation. I've been on staff for, I think I'm coming up on 14 years now, which I'm going to have to stop saying because that sounds like a long time. But I get the great privilege of being in lots of these conversations about KCS and its evolution over time. And hearing all of your stories about how you're implementing and what's working, and sometimes more importantly, what's not working. So thrilled to be here. Lovely to see you.
Thank you to our featured guests. We're going to go ahead and get started with the content, which of course I don't have the page up. So let's get the right page up, shall we? There we go. So we're going to be talking about this series that we've been hosting all year. This is the fourth in the series from the year based on the Adoption and Transformation Guide, the KCS Adoption and Transformation Guide. Optimize and Innovate is the fourth phase of the guide, and we will be digging into all the aspects, the wonderful opportunities that this phase of KCS provides us in our organizations and for our customers. So first of all, a quick note about who we are and how we even have this wonderful wisdom to share with you all. In case you don't know, the Consortium for Service Innovation is a nonprofit, and that's why we get to offer and share so much of this wonderful community wisdom out for free at events like this. And it really is thanks to our generous and thoughtful members. Consortium members, their dues are the primary funding source for our work. So being a member is a great bonus for the members because these are the folks that are really living and breathing KCS all day, every day, and constantly sharing back what they learn with the community and more so with each other. So lots of great constant continuous learning about KCS among our membership, and then they generously love to share it out with the world for the betterment of any service organization. So if you are part of a member company joining us today or listening to this later, thank you so much. And in addition to our members, our training partners and service provider partners are also a huge part of making KCS successful, continuing to evolve it, which is so important. So digging into the optimize phase of KCS, it really is about making the most of continuing to reuse our collective experience. And we've done lots of great work to get here to this phase, or maybe you're thinking about launching next year, your first wave one, as what we had one folk in the comments say, but maybe having a vision of what's to come, where you want to get to eventually. And this idea of maintaining your KCS program and giving knowledge workers the visibility to impact of their contributions. We're going to be talking about these two themes a lot today because this is something that's important throughout KCS adoption journeys and hugely important for long-term sustaining the greatest value of KCS. And the way we'll dig into this phase of the adoption guide today is by looking at the opportunities that this phase provides, looking at the indicators of optimization. How do we know when we're there? And having a great conversation about visibility and impact. How do we do that? Quick background in case you, it's been a minute since you've joined us for the other previous events in the series or you didn't attend. We do have 3 previous events. All of this is captured and recorded for you to dig into at any time. Of course, we can talk about any and all things KCS today that we want, but we're focusing on this 4th phase. And previously, we do have great captured wisdom about the plan and design phase that goes through all of the resources that are available to help you make KCS successful in your organization. Lots of common challenges. We find that even though every organization is unique and it's important to adapt KCS to work best in your organization, the challenges are not so unique. They're pretty common. We hear a lot of the same things over and over again, and lots of good insights there to try and not repeat others' mistakes. Like Kelly mentioned, we love hearing about mistakes, lessons learned, to not repeat them. Learn from your peers. Encourage you to go check out that resource. Adopting in waves, we talked a lot about training, how important it is to, of course, train your knowledge workers, but training and awareness for your management, because they're such an important part of reinforcing KCS principles and practices for it to be successful. Coaching programs, we talked a lot about. Our members have said they've never seen a long-term successful KCS program without a long-term sustained coaching program. So something to commit to for the long term. And then how do we really do those iterative improvements over time? And then we had a 3rd event where we dug into the build proficiency phase, talked a lot about self-service success, tons of insights about KDA programs there. How do you know when you're doing KDA work? Measures, ROI, sustaining KCS momentum. All of that is already been talked about in depth and available for you to dig into. Now, speaking of the great opportunities of KCS, I had to throw this quote in here that we have from a great resource, that organizations that have implemented KCS are uniquely positioned to harness the power of AI. I couldn't help it. The content we're talking about today is not AI specific, but had to get your attention somehow. And it is true, we are finding among our members that doing this great KCS work, committing to the practice, realizing the benefits across your organization, the foundation of the real-time, updated, continuously evolving, structured content is the best source for AI and LLMs in organizations. And our members are finding that their KCS content is outperforming any other type of content when they are implementing AI in their organization. So a little motivation to commit to this practice. So let's look at what are our opportunities when we get to this phase, when we've done all this hard work of adopting KCS. So first and foremost, when it comes to continuous improvement, let's talk about monitoring and maintenance for a minute, because as much as it's going to be fun to dig into expanding the impact and innovation and advanced insights across your organization, it's also important to remember that even when you have matured enough to be at this phase in your adoption, you always want to revisit how you got there, always looking back, finding opportunities to tweak and maintain your program. Ahead of this morning, I was thinking a lot about this analogy of a product, of software products, SaaS specifically. Let's say, I don't know, virtual meeting software that we're all using right now. When you have a development team make a bunch of software and share it with the world, they're always revisiting it. They're fixing bugs. They're going back and enhancing features. And we're not just adding new features, but we're maintaining. A development team would never create a product and put it out into the world and then move on. Has to be maintained as long as you want folks to get value from it. And that's absolutely true for KCS programs as well. Going back and revisiting those foundational documents, staying in sync with your KCS council, evolving your communication and how your team handles KCS as your environment and your own company's change. So that maintenance thing is so, so important. Featured guests, Thomas or David, do you have any wisdom here to share about the maintenance? Do you find that folks want to set it and forget it, or what do you find works well for folks over time?
Okay, so what works well is probably different from what sometimes they want to do. But well, there's obviously on all these lots we could discuss, but the point I'd probably make is if at that point you've not by then we've trained and implemented KDEs, the knowledge domain experts, and they become really crucial to that monitoring and maintenance. If and for that, like I say, there's the things that I found. One is to make sure they really are given adequate training, adequate support from the IT team as far as analytics, and finally, they're given the time. Probably like everything we do with KCS, that tends to be an ongoing challenge, is getting everybody the actual time they need to do what they've been assigned to do. But the KDEs here can have an enormous impact to have somebody specifically assigned to, monitor the knowledge base, monitor and looking for trends and patterns, doing some really in-depth analytics on what's happening, what's working, what isn't. So if you at this point haven't started your KDEs, that's probably one of the first things that I would really highly recommend.
Yeah, about this whole maintenance thing, right? This is the fun part of adoption, right? And I know we're gonna get to all the fun and cool stuff that we can do, but we got to eat our spinach too, right? And so I think it's really important to recognize that no matter how much momentum your KCS program has, that momentum will fall away. And whether it's technology changes or leadership changes or other priorities, or just we're all so busy, right? This thing, even with lots of momentum behind it, will eventually slow down and stop. So while we're thinking about all these other things, we can't forget the fact that we really continue to need to do the blocking and tackling. I had an exec once over a decade ago ask me, all right, so you said the goal is to get KCS into our DNA. Well, once it's in our DNA, why should I have to pay for a program manager after that? Right. And I don't know that I had a great answer at the time, but it is really all these friction factors that happen in organizations. You would just need to keep on it.
Yeah, absolutely. You wouldn't get rid of your software developers after you launch the product, right? Or your product team to help manage product development lifecycle, all of that. It's a commitment to get the value out of it. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sarah, the other thing I might just mention, and this is kind of goes through everything when you're talking about KCS, and David is exactly right. Get it into the DNA or get that culture shifted. But the interesting thing is, as that happens, the community really does take over. So although I said KDEs are absolutely critical, the other reality of this is when the culture has shifted, the community itself starts doing a lot of the monitoring and maintenance. They're every day, they live in that knowledge base. And so generally, although the KDEs are doing that in-depth analysis, often the first sign we get is actually from the user community itself. They're the ones that notice something or recognize something that's not quite what it should be. So keeping that community ownership, that community alive, is absolutely crucial throughout the whole process. But even here, it still maintains itself to a large degree once that culture transition's happened.
Yeah, seeing KCS as part of the culture. We've heard stories from member companies who it's when the folks across the organization start asking about and for KCS, if they haven't when they're the ones that sort of grassroots momentum and connection and appreciation for this is the way that we do our work properly, seeing it embedded that way. Love to hear that. Another thing worth highlighting, and we won't spend so much time on every single bullet, but really these first two bullets I think are the most important ones, is this idea of refresh or reboot as needed, which sometimes can be a little bit more of an extreme version of maintenance. This is just something to talk about quite openly. We had gathered with a bunch of our leader members last week, and the topic of failure came up, or rebooting KCS. And someone asked in the room, how many people have seen a KCS program all the way through to, you know, the optimized phase without feeling like they needed to start over or completely refresh an aspect of the program? And basically almost everyone raised their hands. It's so common. The value that comes from doing things wrong, we try not to, of course, that's why we want to learn from each other, but the value that comes from doing things wrong, assessing what went wrong, and fixing, and sometimes that is a reboot or a refresh of a thing. It's very common. And so if you do need to go back and revisit aspects of your program, if you look at the indicators of the build proficiency phase, if you're not at 90-0 in terms of publishing content to self-service right away, if your new versus known ratio isn't trending in the right direction, if coaching isn't something that's baked into your program, it's really important to go back and revisit that. Any thoughts or words of encouragement on the topic of failure, Kelly?
I do have some words about this, in part because a lot of the time we hear that people feel like this is a point of failure, or a point of like, I haven't done it right. It's right. We're really used to approaching things like this as a project. And so if you get to this point and you're like, oh my gosh, something isn't working, then something has gone wrong. But I am so wanting to change the language around this, because great news, this is a system and we're not going to get it right out of the gate the first time. It's not going to all work perfectly the way we have envisioned it. And so this is such a wonderful moment to say, holy smokes, look at all the things that are happening. What kinds of adjustments can we make to help that go better? As opposed to, I didn't get 100% accuracy, wonderfulness, perfectness, completeness on my KCS implementation. So I have done something wrong, or the program is going wrong. It's not so much about the wrongness as it is about, there's a ton of tentacles here, right? There's a ton of things that happen differently because we're working in a system, as opposed to being able to check the boxes. So this, I think, is something that we could use some more language around when I think about the things that the consortium publishes on this. This continuous improvement piece is, congratulations, you've learned enough to make adjustments. And so I have a lot of energy around this particular topic.
Well,
David,
and
go.
I just want to support, I want to support that. Language is so important. Reboot, right, has all of this baggage with it. Like, um, you know, so how about spring cleaning, right? I really like the idea of, look, we've got a moment, we can catch our breaths, we've learned a lot. What can we do to give ourselves a new kind of fresh start in some areas? And and build on our success. But hey, what about getting some fresh blood in the KCS Council, right? Should we rethink the membership there? Should we rethink our coaching program? Whatever it is, think of it as spring cleaning rather than fixing mistakes. And to that point, I want to highlight this kind of tricky branding problem, right? Which is that you want to be able to make significant changes in the program. You want to be able to make big improvements, but you don't want people to think that's because it was a failure, right? And so thinking carefully about what you call this set of things, right? And giving it a name that says, this is the next good thing rather than we're fixing something. Ryan Matthews at NetApp had a fantastic KCS program, but it needed a spring cleaning when Ryan came on board. So he talked about rolling out KCS V6. Now, in a practical sense, was it what happened between V5 and V6 that really drove those spring cleaning improvements? Not entirely, but it just says, hey, we're going to the next new thing. And that is a very helpful branding to me. Humans are loss averse, so don't take away their licenses. Don't take away their program. Build on it.
Love that. So yeah, there's so much opportunity once we get to the optimize and innovate phase, but I thought that those two concepts really deserved the most attention because they're the most important, I think, to keep in mind as we go get the greater value, the greater evolve loop goodness, is one of our members likes to say. So with that said, this is what becomes options for us when we have all of this great data, this constantly evolving source of organizational knowledge. We can unlock advanced insights, true trends for data-driven decisions across your whole customer life cycle. I really like harnessing KCS data to be the primary source. It's your primary source of customer experience data. And what I mean by that is not that it's the main one or the only one, but it's a firsthand source, right? It's not secondary, it's not hearsay. The data you have from KCS is primary reflection of what your customers are going through. And so using their words, using the numbers that tell the stories of what they're going through to ask for improvements, to drive cross-functional initiatives, you have the best justification, I think, that you possibly could in terms of what you want to achieve. Lots of opportunity once you're comfy and mature with your KCS practices to apply KCS to new domains, whether that's other product lines or other departments. We're hearing folks applying KCS in sales teams, in HR teams, applying concepts in product development teams even. How are you really embedding KCS principles across the way you even just communicate day to day as an organization? And then, of course, advancing how you're really embedding your real-time knowledge into the customer experience, whether that's any part of prospects or onboarding or embedded into the products and services themselves. And finally, but not really finally, the innovation phase or opportunities. What are new ways that you can evolve KCS practices? Get creative. How can you take the principles and core concepts and apply them to completely new ideas? Of course, automation and emerging technology. We already talked about how KCS content is, we think, the best. We've seen the best to feed LLMs, and really using the principles of KCS to interact with your customers in a new connected way, building trust, making them see the impact of interactions with you and feeling like they can even be a part of evolving the customer experience together. Featured guests, any thoughts or fun things to talk about? What are your favorite things you've seen that organizations have gleaned or achieved by making use of great KCS data at this phase?
Well, again, I'll just jump in real quick. It's interesting to me that at some point as KCS matures, if it's really going well, the community really does take ownership. And all of a sudden, all the best and greatest ideas are not coming, for me as an outside consultant, kind of driving the program, or the managers, or it's the people again that are doing it every day. Just a few examples of that. With one company, I don't know, probably about 8 months into the program, it was going great, huge momentum. People were really excited. They were in the knowledge base all day, every day, literally 100% participation. And all of a sudden, they started coming to us and saying, hey, we would like to meet with the developers on a regular basis. Is that okay if we set that up? And the interesting thing is the company had tried to drive that like 2 years before, and it was a total failure because they wanted support and the developers for their product get together. they'd get together and the developer would say, well, what's most important? And the agent say, well, everything's most important, and would have a list of 100 things that need fixed. And everybody got discouraged and frustrated, and so they quit. Well, now, of course, with KCS, first of all, the TSEs were driving this, and they set up the meetings with their development teams. But now, of course, it's a whole different ball game. Now it's, okay, this article, which represents this issue, we've had 472 tickets linked to it. We know from this that each one of those represents this many minutes of time on our time and this many minutes on the customer time. So that's our number one issue. Completely different experience. And now all of a sudden everybody's excited. The developers are completely on board with it. A little while later, they came back and said, hey, so we want to do this. Can we change the product? Is there any way we can get it where we can subscribe our customers to the issue, to the article? And so we looked at it. We were able to do that, made the change, because what they wanted to do was whenever there was an issue that they were waiting for a fix, they would simply subscribe their customer to it. And as soon as the hot fix or something came out, then that customer automatically was notified and they would change the article. And all of a sudden now, literally in some cases, 500 customers, instead of now digging back and trying to figure out who had this issue, who do we need to notify, the system took care of it completely automatically. And they were literally on almost a weekly basis. They were coming with all these fun ideas. We weren't even involved basically anymore in the optimization. They had taken over completely.
That's a great example, Thomas.
So I'd like to follow back up with what Sarah was talking about, and according to the laws and edicts as of 2024 in our business, we can't go very long without talking about AI. So
I didn't even try. It just
it
jumped
just
out.
had, but boom, you had to put it in. And of course, when we developed this guide, or when the consortium developed this guide, that it wasn't that type of generative AI wasn't a thing, right? So part of the reason that we lay things out in these 4 sets of activities is specifically about timing, right? If you launch wave 1 and your executive sponsor comes over 2 weeks later and says, well, where's my case deflection, right? That's not helpful. So we need to adopt in waves. So it's sort of the same thing with AI here. First, it's completely safe to do what Sarah was talking about, which is to take this really well-crafted, targeted, up-to-date, about one thing, structured content that KCS generates, and doing all kinds of things with it. And as I'm looking at the participants, I know I've had conversations with a number of you about successes that you've had with this, and that's great. So that's safe. Do that whenever you've got a decent collection of knowledge. But in terms of like, let's AI-ify all of these processes, right? I think this is probably a good time to really go into that. I've had this conversation more than once with somebody who was getting ready to launch wave 1, right? And there's so much, so much in planning, so much planning and design that you need to do. And this person was, oh, hold on, wait. Before we launch, we also need to get some AI in there to help the users. Like, well, hold on. You've got a million things going on, and you have decided that you want to add risk and complexity to an already difficult program by adding in a technology that we don't really know as much as we need to about yet, and is way more sophisticated than your IT department has ever dealt with. Is that the way that we're going to speed up KCS adoption? So I would say, and just let's get the blocking and tackling going first, take advantage of what this can do for AI. But this is kind of around the time that we want to innovate around having AI make the process better. I don't, Kendall in the chat talked about some of the innovative things that they're doing. Well, F5 has a very mature KCS program they've been working on for a long time. So now's the perfect time for that.
Really well said. Great insight there, David. Thank you. So moving on towards indicators of optimization, just grabbing a quote from the core concept about transformation and continuous improvement, just to kind of summarize our opportunities here, that evolved loop learning drives continuous improvement in processes, policies, and outcomes. So there's so many options and opportunities throughout the organization, not just product specific, not just doing the AI things. It could be as simple as, clearer or changed policies, processes that are still human managed, right? What is KCS data revealing to you about opportunities to improve the customer experience anywhere across the organization, really based off of what we're seeing as a whole? So looking at those indicators of optimization, how do we know if we're here? And when we are here, what should we be looking at to sort of fuel our opportunities? So grouped our indicators of optimization, we have a link here to the guide where you can look at them in detail, but at a high level, we have proactive support opportunities and customer support indicators. So proactive support are things like, of course, increasing self-service, and that's not just in a knowledge base, that's anywhere your customers are. How are you offering them KCS fueled content that's going to help them be successful, not just troubleshooting. Over time, of course, seeing incident volume decreasing, and hopefully you're making use of this data not just to increase self-service. Great, 100 people are now able to self-serve a problem instead of contact support, but what if we eliminate the problem? And looking at some folks in the chat who their scale, it's a lot more than 100 folks who are going to be helped by mitigating some problems. So how are you mitigating friction and really eliminating root cause of questions or challenges or whatever's going to help customers be more successful? And then speaking of customer success, customer experience indicators, things like customer loyalty, product adoption. I put employee engagement here because I think employee experience and customer experience really go hand in hand. And so your employees are more engaged, they're able to have increased capacity from not focusing on repeat issues as much to really dig into KDA work or other more advanced ways to help customers. This is the good stuff where we can that we can make use of. Featured guests, any thoughts about indicators of optimization? What have you seen teams use and make use of?
Well, I just mentioned one thing, and we have to be a little careful, and everybody, I'm sure realize this, but that all of our metrics are just indicators. They don't tell us what something is. They tell us what possibly is going on. But I mean, just one example of being careful with that. Pretty much every company I've worked with, I've warned them that what they're going to see is the time to resolution can drop dramatically, but then also warned them that at one point as it matures, it will start climbing back up again. And they never believe me until they see it happening, but it makes sense, of course, as they're no longer day by day doing those, the ones that come in constantly over and over, those same small issues, and the ones that the customers as the customers take over those, what it means that, for one example, one company, their average time to resolution was 28 days in a fairly complex environment. But we dropped that down to about 2.5 days over about a 5-6 month period. And then it basically doubled and went up to about 6 days, because now the only issues they're really working on are the much more complex, but now they actually have the time to do that. It was a huge win, even though technically from the metrics, we had just doubled the time to resolution, but that was actually a huge sign of success. And the group then, again, the user community came to us and once again with the best ideas, and they created their own SWAT teams where now they were assigning each other. It was really an early swarm with different terminology, but again, they created themselves. that they got their own teams, and when they had these really complex issues, now they have the luxury of basically saying, okay, here, you 8 guys, you just go work on this until you've got it fixed and we know exactly what to do. So it was brilliant, um, but not necessarily what they might have expected as a win, as it were.
Yeah, so important. Kelly put in the chat about how much the adoption guide is about setting expectations and what an important expectation to set about some of those traditional support metrics that sometimes we seem like they're going in the wrong direction, but it's actually an indicator of all the right things happening. David, you're going to add?
Oh, yeah, just in terms of proactive support, I'd like to share two kind of tactical measures that I found very effective in sort of understanding what's going on, perhaps not what is, but it's an indicator of that. And also a way of communicating with executives, and that is contact rate and contact ratio, or assisted unassisted ratio. So if we think about proactive support, not just as proactive preemptive, but also anything that we can do without our humans being directly involved. Right. If we are good at if we provide a great online experience, then people are going to start to use it more, which means that they should start to use the assisted channel less. And if you look at those two as a ratio, right, how much are we taking through the unassisted channel relative to the cases that we take, right? And if you know if you're at 1 to 1, boy, there's a lot for most businesses, assuming self-service is an option. There's a lot of work to be done. 10 to 1, unassisted to assisted, that's starting to be kind of exciting. Let's get it over 50 to 1. Now you're breaking some ground. You're really innovating. So just that one very simple number gives you a sense of how well your automation is doing. And then the other related one is contact rate. So for whatever driver of support that you have, whether it's monthly recurring revenue, number of users, right, whatever's right for your business, look at the number of cases that you're getting it, divide it by that demand driver, so it gets sort of normalized to demand, and then see how this is going, right? Because the more we can fix issues in the product that may not be bugs, but we can make the product experience better, the more we can successfully automate support interactions or service interactions, the fewer cases that we'll get per person, right? And if you go to an exec and you say, well, it used to be that for X dollars of monthly recurring revenue, we used to get about 10 cases, and now we're taking 6, right? That's a big statement. So two little tactical things that I think are helpful.
Great advice there, David. Thank you.
I just want to tack on to what both David and Thomas are saying in terms of the metrics that David described and the way he described them are a great first sort of way to think about the one-line story that you're telling at the water cooler, which I don't think anybody has anymore, right? But we have been doing a lot of talking about, how am I, and I think we're going to get into this actually next, but the whole sort of like, how do I help the organization understand what we've learned about KCS? And if you have one sentence in your pocket about, hey man, did you know we had 5,000 searches in the portal last week? Like, thank God we have all those KCS articles published. That's it. You've done the work, right? Like you are seeding. If you tell that one-line story to everyone you meet, now we are kind of building this kind of cultural understanding that we're creating incredible value by doing this KCS work. Because, I mean, can you think about like what would happen if all those 5,000 searches turned into 5,000 phone calls or whatever? So
That's a great example,
Yeah.
and a perfect segue to the next bit.
Hey, Serge, quick before we leave that
Yeah,
though, I just wanted to mention, so Callie over in the chat, it sounds so cool. She says we're implementing coaching for other initiatives since it was so successful at KCS launch. I mean, what a huge indicator of KCS success. I mean, if your coaching has been that successful that you're going to go use it for other programs and that's just amazing. So I just thought that was the coolest thing.
Yeah,
Way to go, Cal.
absolutely. And maybe that's a whole new section of indicators of just people wanting to copy and make use of KCS methodology across their teams in completely new ways. That's
Yeah,
a great indicator
exactly.
that things are going
Oh,
well.
it is. And that kind of actually, I remember one thing with one company, one of the great indicators I saw that you would never see in a metric. When I first went in, it was like little groundhogs. Everybody's popping up constantly. You've got 200 agents out there, and people are constantly popping up, talking to each other and looking over. And 6 months later, the only time I saw that happen was one of them would stand up and lean over and say, "Hey, you didn't create an article on that." And they were holding each other accountable.
Oh, yeah.
But that physical, literally the whole physical environment had changed, and you wouldn't see that in a metric. But to me, it was an enormous indicator of how well things were going.
Yeah, great call out. So let's talk about how to know how well things are going. Visibility to impact. This is a key responsibility of leadership, not just in the KCS Council, but senior leadership all the way to the top to understand their role. It's why we talked about like the training early and often of leaders for KCS for them to understand the importance of the motions and the importance of their role in echoing and reverberating the value of it. Leaders really have to enable and invest in making it possible and common to demonstrate visibility to impact for knowledge workers. So when everyone who's tuning in today, when you registered to join us for this event, we asked you a question. How do you provide visibility to impact for your knowledge workers? And we had about 70 folks fill in that optional question, which was great. Of course, just put a sample of sort of the themes here. Definitely lots of examples of metrics, contributor and reuse dashboards. If I had made a word cloud of all of the things that everyone submitted, dashboard would be the largest and most centered word. That was the single word I saw the most. And then variations thereof, support volume trends are a way to see it. Meetings, this is the early and often communication in all the ways, in all the places, in the coaching sessions, in your team syncs, in your all hands meetings. You're making sure that your executives are giving you time on those all hands meetings to give those shout outs for telling those stories about how KCS is working. Day-to-day communication, whether that's in your Slack or whatever your chat platform is, whatever your internet resources are, email, news. I saw people mention newsletter. Quarterly awards are talked about a lot. I did proceed with caution here because anytime we talk about gamification in KCS, there are some words of warning that I know at least David would have words on, if not all three of our guests. And storytelling and small wins. This is the one that I wanted to actually quote from what folks submitted, which is just the examples of firsthand experiences and aha moments. Like, we don't need to over engineer visibility and impact. Yes, dashboards would be the biggest word cloud word appearing, but those casual stories, what Thomas shared about what like evidence of this working and being embraced and appreciated in your organization can go a long way too. And an important additional dimension that we wanted to really highlight here, and I'm going to invite Kelly onto her soapbox to talk about this a little bit, which is the sort of like the why behind the visibility of impact. It's not to show off shiny dashboards. It's really about helping folks understand that the way that they are doing work is making a difference, that they have an understanding about how they're making meaning out of what they're doing, what they're moving towards in the future, and of course, the big picture why. Kelly, can I invite you to speak a little bit more about this?
Yes, you can, because I love this soapbox so much. I want to stand up here all day long. One of the sort of best parts to me about being on the consortium staff is that every time we prepare for a call like this, or we look at content that we have published out there, we find sometimes that the context has changed, right? In terms of what we said at the time versus how we sort of read it now. And it's so funny to me now, as we're talking about getting ready for this call, the idea of visibility to impact is perhaps nowhere near descriptive enough to what it is that we want people to be doing. So the visibility and alone is not enough, right? Because you can, that doesn't mean like I turned a dashboard on for you and you could go find it if you wanted to. It's so much more about if what we are doing in Optimize and Innovate, if what we have built is a well-functioning KCS system in which we are sharing and collecting and sharing and leveraging this collective knowledge, then one really powerful way to keep it going is to remind people why we're doing it. And that really has to be a communications plan. And it really is a great way to leverage your strategic framework, which sometimes we forget we built back when we were in plan and design. And even when we go back and look at strategic framework, right, maybe those words are not the right way to describe. All we mean is help people make the connection between organizational goals and why we're doing KCS and how we get there, right? So to be able to take a moment to help the people who are doing the work understand why we're doing the work. And again, it can be real short stories, right? Those one-line stories about, holy smokes, you published that article last week, like already it's had X number of views. Some of those you have to be a little bit careful with, because then people think, oh, we're looking for views, I better go view my own article a bunch of times, right? But just David has a mug that says, do not put goals on activities. But right, the telling people that you see what they are doing and that it is impacting the organization has a huge benefit and ripple effect in terms of keeping people interested in doing the work. Thank you. I'll step off my soapbox now. If you'd like me to step back on at any time, I would be happy to.
Anytime you want to talk about storytelling and telling people their impact, right? I'm going to be listening raptly to you. But the I think this is such an undertaken advantage of opportunity. I can't tell you how often I go into an organization and I talk to just doing KCS, I talk to a KCS publisher. And I'm like, wow, you can put your own stuff out like on the internet or the customer portals. Like, yeah, that's great. So, for the article of yours that you contributed to that's been used the most or viewed the most, how many times has it been viewed? And generally what I hear back is, well, I don't know. I mean, talk about easy, right? Talk about a quick win. And it's just I love Kelly's line about just putting a report out there doesn't do anything. The other thing is that we are humans and we don't necessarily pay attention to numbers first, right? If you have a charity that is coming to you to try and get you to contribute something, they rarely start off with an ROI analysis of, the benefit they're created. They'll generally start off with a story about how somebody's life has been changed, because that's what we respond to as humans. And then, yeah, I actually do want to see the numbers behind that. But it's numbers and narrative, but let's start with the narrative and let's not forget it.
Great call out, David. I just want to highlight a couple things from the chat. Vicky says, in our coaching session agenda, the first thing is to look at the person's individual contribution data on their own dashboard. Yeah, start with directly showing them how they've contributed. Still a dashboard, but it's having that conversation that adds meaning to it, making it clear that, yeah, we're coaching, we're trying to improve, but first and foremost, let's take some time to recognize, all the great work we're doing. And Janice shared, we tie their work back to our company's mission, helping them understand even the positive emotional impact it can have on the consumer of the information. Love that, the storytelling aspect of the connecting back to the mission there. Wonderful. Yeah, David, start with the why. Always and forever.
Hey, Sarah, there were a couple questions on the KDE. Michelle had asked, what is a good amount of time budget? And probably like everything with KCS, it changes as it matures. But starting out, it really does take quite a bit of time. Um, I, it's hard to say because it varies with every organization, the size, the complexity, the domain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But as a general rule, I always suggest that they start out with a KDE of having at least a fourth of their time available as a KDE. It really is time consuming starting out, meaning about 10 hours a week, so that they really can have the time to get familiar with the reports, the data available, what's missing and how to get it, depending on the tool and what's available, though they may have to do a lot of manual manipulation of the data that's coming out in order to get the analytics. So that it's also highly dependent on how sophisticated and how well integrated the tools are. If you have really sophisticated reports coming out with a lot of the analytics already coming out, then obviously it's going to take way less time. If they're doing a lot of manual manipulation of that data, it can take way more than 10 hours a week starting out. It may almost be a full-time job for a while. So
Yeah.
it varies a lot, but I guess the point I would make is just make sure that you have really taken a look at that carefully and given adequate, whatever time, depending on the situation, they have plenty of time to do that, because it is really frustrating to be given that assignment and then just simply not have the time to do it successfully. And then, Kelly made the comment, yeah, so varies. It's so dependent on the situation. But the other thing I was just going to say, along with Kelly, the visibility is so huge, and David, that and it's so much more challenging now. I mean, 20 years ago, I had a company, not a huge company, it was about 1,500 employees, but I invited the CEO to come to the monthly reward recognition meeting, and he accepted. So you can imagine when all the agents are there and it's the CEO pulling them up and handing them, their certificate or whatever little reward it was. Huge, huge, huge. I mean, for the first time in their whole career, they felt like somebody that really mattered actually knew they existed. So it was hugely successful. But 90% of those people were all in the same location, and the same location as the CEO. Today, where 90% maybe all be remote, we have to get way, way more creative about to do it. But just to lend my support to what Kelly and David both said, that making what's happening, finding creative ways to do it, is just a huge part of success with KCS.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't need to wait for the sophisticated automated dashboard to be
No.
enabled by your whatever team to be able to start making this a reality and
Absolutely not.
making
Yeah.
an important contribution. We have a couple minutes left, but and we can still talk about some final thoughts, but I do want to highlight an event we're really excited about next week. Our friends at Ping Identity are going to be sharing about their experience of 1 year at KCS, and I know they've had some great successes, and some experienced KCS leaders were involved in this program. And so really looking forward next week hearing from them a real case study about what they've been able to accomplish in a year. So we'll throw that link in the chat, and would love to see you next week for that.
One just quick second, we're not calling it a refresh or a reboot anymore. So this is their next version of KCS. So this is not their very first time maybe experiencing this, but it is a good solid 1 year's worth of the next version.
Oh, love that. Perfect tie into what we talked about before. And finally, from a great resource that members made more recently, a year or so ago, even though V6 of KCS has been around for a while, as I mentioned before, our members are constantly chatting and collaborating and putting more resources out there. So the why behind each phase is a great thing to look at, of the, let's remember why we're doing all this. Let's not get worried about over engineering things. Let's do the right things for the right reasons. And why are we optimizing and innovating here? Because we want to be an adaptable organization. We're not doing KCS to do KCS. We're doing KCS to be an adaptable, evolving organization, so that we have the most up-to-date organizational memory. We're never worried about knowledge loss from anyone walking out the door. And we always have the latest and greatest understanding of what our customers are experiencing. That's what we want out of all of this. Any final thoughts from our featured speakers, our guests here today?
Yeah, and that is when you go to a CEO to talk about a big transformation effort, one of the things that you often ask them to do is say, write the Forbes article, right? Let's say we're successful 4 years from now, 3 years from now, let's write the Forbes article. And I would say with this phase of adoption, do the same thing. Write your consortium case study the way that you would like it to come out, in a year or two or whatever, and help that, obviously driven by the strategic framework, have that be a North Star.
Love it. Thomas or Kelly?
I just love that idea as a sort of organizing principle about where are we going, what are we doing, why are we doing it, and how will we know if we got there? That's a pretty well-structured way to figure that out, isn't it?
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, and actually somebody mentioned this, I should have gone back and looked in the chat, but so much of this is managing expectations, meaning it's a win if we defined it as a win, right? So although yeah, we want I believe, pretty aggressive, optimistic goals, but we need to keep them realistic enough because a small win is absolutely more exciting for everybody than a no win at all. Somebody else said, hey, the adoption guide, the secret title is managing executive expectations. and that really is true, throughout this. We need to make sure that people have realistic expectations what's going to happen, but that can be pretty high goals. I mean, KCS has the power to make enormous transitive changes fairly quickly if everybody's on board and we follow the program and do what it can be do what can truly be done. But yeah, anyway, and again, 100% agree with everything Kelly and David have said.
Wonderful. Well, that brings us to the end of our time together. Thank you so much, Thomas and Kelly and David and everyone in the chat. We love all your wisdom and chatter there. And we look forward to seeing you at another event soon. Take care.